For thousands of children across the UK, living in limbo is a way of life because they have undiagnosed genetic conditions, illnesses and disabilities for which their doctors don't have any answers. They may be obvious, they may be invisible, but without a label, they're a barrier, limiting access to services and leaving unanswered questions for the parents who care for them.
There's a very wide variety of disabilities in our school, but it's nice to know that they've got a label, so you know that they've got cerebral palsy, so you know what specific exercises to do with them, what kind of things that they do like and what they don't like. So it's hard in that way to know what activities to do with Jonah to bring out the best in him.
Jonah is 6 years old and yet he's unable to walk or talk and is fed through a tube into his stomach. Sometimes he seems oblivious to the world around him, but his doctors don't know why. This puts a strain on his parents, who provide 24-hour care.
You do have to fight for everything. I've never had anything just given to me on a plate. I always phone calls, constantly chasing people to get things. So, you know, that just makes life more stressful. In an already stressful situation, you're already having to deal with the fact that you've got a disabled child. You're then constantly having to chase professionals as well to try and get what you need.
What sort of challenges have you faced because your child doesn't have a diagnosis?
I think from a diagnosis point of view with Jonah, a lot of the time professionals assume that, oh, well, maybe he'll get better. We don't know what his prognosis is. He might actually be able to walk in 3 years' time, so let's not spend loads of money. Let's hang off and wait and see if he improves. And as a mum, it's just like, he's not suddenly going to be able to walk. Can you just listen to us?
It's estimated that 12,000 families across the UK are in a similar situation. Parents who are struggling to find support because their children don't have a label. Nathan, who's 7, has learning difficulties and is the same size as his 4-year-old sister. He receives little or no support from social services. Yet his brother Matthew has a very different story because Matthew has a diagnosis.
Matthew's autism is textbook. Everyone understands autism. His doctors understand what's wrong with him. Therapists understand what's wrong with him. Because Nathan has no set diagnosis, nobody knows what to expect with Nathan. So it's so much easier for everybody concerned to think, oh well, with Matthew, this'll work because it's been tried and tested numerous times with various children. With Nathan, it's like you're writing a book.
And how does his condition affect the family?
Everything revolves around Nathan. Because he has that many different medical professionals involved in his care, you can guarantee there'll never be a time where it's suitable. In a lot of them, if you want to change them, it's impossible without another 3-month wait. So everyone has to fit in with Nathan's appointments.
How does the family cope with that?
They know no different now. This is it.
Research has shown that parents with undiagnosed children feel frustrated, isolated and powerless. For these families, Syndromes Without a Name is there to provide support when they need it.
Especially at the moment when, services are being restricted all over the place because of budget constraints. It's very difficult for families to get through those first hurdles to get social care support or to get educational support because they're being told they don't have a diagnosis, so they don't qualify, which is ridiculous. It's about needs assessment of that child, but in a time when things are being cut back anyway, a diagnosis becomes quite an easy way to filter out a certain number of families from the system.
Jonah, Nathan and other children who are undiagnosed may seem to have very different disabilities, but doctors still believe that they have a genetic cause. This means that the problems originate in the building blocks of our bodies, our DNA. I've met up with Dr. Julie Lloyd, a lecturer in genetics at the University of Essex, to find out how these syndromes are related.
I've been meeting families with undiagnosed genetic disorders, but what's been confusing me is how our genes can actually cause the disabilities that a lot of these children are having. How does that work?
Well,
We have a whole set of genes inside every cell in our body, and some of them carry out relatively simple tasks. So they control very small parts of our makeup, the colour of our eyes, whether we have curly hair or not. But there are other genes inside our cells which have much bigger functions that actually control the process of development. And a genetic disorder occurs when there is an error or a mistake in the structure of one of those genes, and that then affects its function inside the body.
Now, a lot of the families that have these undiagnosed conditions in their children, their parents aren't affected, other children in the family aren't affected. Why is it that this happens?
Well, the errors in the genes occur as the result of mutations, and mutations can happen spontaneously in our cells, usually associated with the process of cell division. So when the cell needs to divide, it has to replicate, and errors can occur so that the DNA isn't copied correctly, and changes from a small single base, which is one of the chemicals that makes up the DNA, can take place, or larger rearrangements so that whole sections of DNA may be missing or duplicated.
And so whether the problems are spontaneous or not is another unknown for our families. This means even more difficult decisions when planning for future children. Parents have to consider that their next child may be disabled, but it's also possible that a normal child could carry the faulty gene and then pass it on to future generations. And yet there is hope on the horizon for our families, as they may have the chance to get all of their questions answered. And it's here at the Sanger Centre in Cambridge where it all began, where the human genome was sequenced, that the new study, Deciphering Developmental Disorders, is bringing hope for 12,000 children across the UK. The lead researcher of the study, Dr. Matthew Hurls, has been telling us how his new technologies are bringing hope for the future.
So the DDD study is the Deciphering Developmental Disorders study, which is aiming to understand the genetic causes of severe developmental disorders in children, and then with that information improve how diagnosis of those disorders is done in the NHS.
So you say that you're using tests that aren't available on the NHS. What tests are you using that differ?
So the NHS typically provides two types of tests. It provides a look across the entirety of the DNA for large segments that are gained or lost, but will only identify if they're very large segments that have gained or lost. Or it performs tests for single genes. So if a clinician thinks, I think it could be mutations in this gene, then they'll order that particular test for that gene. The fundamental problem with that is that there's of the order of certainly over 1,000 genes that are known to cause developmental disorders, so the clinicians have to have a very tricky job in trying to identify which is the correct gene to screen. But we now have new technologies that allow us to look at much smaller gains and losses of DNA that are currently invisible to the techniques that are used in the NHS currently, but also to look across all the genes in the genome at once and not just have to select a particular gene.
The Deciphering Developmental Disorders study is also unique due to its interaction with the families through SWAN.
It's been really interesting sort of seeing a community of families come together around the research, and with the DDD study in particular, we've set it up so that SWAN can very much be the sort of information front. So it means the families feel really involved in the research, and it's not just they're participating by giving their children samples, but actually they know that they have a voice, that they're going to be kept informed, and it's crucially important for them. I mean, they're ticking down the days waiting for that response.
And so with studies such as DDD and technology improving, thousands of families nationwide are hoping that a genetic diagnosis is just around the corner. Their parents need a name for the conditions.
I think having a diagnosis in a sense makes no difference to Jonah. He's still the same person, he's still Jonah, we're still going to have to deal with the same things, but at least you know what you're dealing with, and at least you know, well actually, it isn't anything I did. You know, this is the way he was born.
All I want to know is how Nathan will be in the future. That's all a diagnosis would mean to me, is what can I expect? Because I know with Matthew, I know what I can expect as an adult for him. But with Nathan, it's just so unknown. But service-wise, that would mean, yes, someone will finally help. I may get some help with something overnight for sleep. But until then, I've got not a chance of anything.